To you all students of MA Final, this is paper 4th, unit C. We have been discussing R. Parthasarthy's poetry and the autobiographical poetic collection Rough Passage we discussed earlier, and there are 3 poems from Rough Passage prescribed in your syllabus, as I told you earlier: Exile, Trial, and Homecoming. Now, composition of poems in this poetic collection, it took 15 years. He composed these poems during the period of 1961 to 1976-77, this session of the year. And it is there in the anthology 10 20th Century Indian Poets, edited by the poet R. Parthasarthy. Now, I would like to focus the first poem, Exile. And this is actually in the form of section. And there are several poems in this section, Exile. The poems prescribed in your syllabus: second poem and eighth poem. Okay, is that clear? And the title of this poem, Through the Holes in a Wall. And first of all, students try to understand the concept of exile, the notion of exile. Now, what is the meaning of that? The literal meaning of the word, it is associated with the notion and the condition of someone being sent or kept away from his own country, town, or village, or the like, and especially for, say, some political reason. Sometimes, the monarch, these monarchs, when they were compelled to leave the country and live outside the country. So remember, leave and live. So this is the literal meaning of the word. See, first of all, have a look here in this. So exile, the conception of exile, it must be clear to you. So we have actually literal meaning and metaphorical meaning is the focal point here. So what is the literal meaning of word exile? It is just, especially for some political reason, the king or monarchs, they were compelled to leave the country and live outside, and someone being sent or kept away from his own country, town, or village. This is the concept. And see, then we have two parameters: exile by others or by his own choice. So here the person, or say monarch, who is isolated or who is away from his own people, his country, or the like. So this is the concept. As for instance, example in say, As You Like It. Now here we have, see, this is the conception of exile. Okay, so see the here, and we have some example. For instance, we have example from As You Like It. You must have read it. And do you remember Duke, senior Duke, who was compelled to leave his estate and who had to live in the forest of Arden? So living the life of exile. So this is the simple conception of here. But now, what is important here? Metaphor of exile. Yes. Pivotal point here, metaphor of exile. Now, in this poem, it is, reflection of R. Parthasarthy's, his predicament, his plight. And here, as during his, especially, during his stay in England, and at that time, particular that time, he felt out of place, and it is sort of displacement for him. Now, what is the reason behind it? Two, reasons he has been giving. And I mentioned it earlier also. When we here discuss the metaphor of exile, I mean, all the time he was exposed to the language, to the, for instance, foreign language when he was living over there in England, and even the culture. And nobody was there, just who was deeply involved in his roots. So there is, rootlessness. Nobody was there to support him. And this is exactly the feeling of alienation. Alienation and isolation. So this kind of, displacement when he lived in England. So this is exile for the poet himself. It is not in that sense. So now this must be absolutely clear to you. And the poet, he is quite, honest enough to depict his views on exile, transparency. Now, this is what actually in autobiographical works we have. And this is, I think, most significant characteristic features, one of the most important characteristic features in autobiographical works. Honesty and transparency. He becomes very outspoken in that way. He becomes absolutely transparent when he points out his, or he rather, depicts his own bitter experiences over there. So this is this sense of isolation and alienation. So it must be clear to you. Then we come to the point that when we, discuss the concept of exile. So what does it imply? It implies the sense of displacement for the poet when he lived in England. So the point is that it is, the feeling of rootlessness, loss of identity, because he was compelled to live in the society where culture is absolutely different. So here again we have dilemmatic state of mind, since he was brought up in two cultures, both Tamil culture and of course here westernized culture. So this kind of conflict between the two, and so it is actually mentioned in the first part, and which is exile. So now we would come to, again we would like to, so what is the title, students? The title of this first poem in this section, Exile. Is that clear now? In this particular section we have the title is Through the Holes in a Wall. And when we discuss this poem, actually we have here the poet, he tends to depict the, question of language and identity first. Now, what is the reason that he has focused this? The idea underlying his thing. Now, you just, you would have a better understanding, you would comprehend in a proper way. For instance, say, take your example. You hail from India, or say any state, Rajasthan, and suppose you go to some foreign land, and imagine that all the time, there is a lot of exposure of foreign language around, and around the people around you. See that there is, absolutely different culture, and all the, the foreigners over there, and nobody is there to talk to you in your mother tongue. So at that time, say you feel so alienated. This is exactly the feeling of alienated and isolated. So so you feel so out of place, because absolutely distinct culture. So this is, and now the poet, another point here, the poet wants to highlight is that the feeling of, when he talks about feeling of humiliation also, this is also another point, the reason behind it is superiority complex in the foreigners, and in his poem, in this Exile, the title is Through the Holes in a Wall, in which actually the poem begins with this first line. So this is the title in a way. So the people over there, they call color. So this is this kind of humiliation also he has mentioned, and therefore the sense of rootlessness, loss of identity, that he has highlighted here. And the point that we would like to delve deep here, the poet's inner conflict. Now what is the reason behind it? Because of these two cultures and juxtaposition of European and Indian culture, and predominance of what, this westernized culture, and even the British rule. And this is the reason that the of the feeling of alienation, isolation, and this resulted in the feeling of loss of identity also. And again the point is that he also feels rootlessness, and he also, the feeling of nostalgia is also there, and then homesickness, and he also, he's looking for, and he's rather craving for his own tradition and culture. This is what exactly he wants to highlight. And when there is, something, he, to quote himself from this poem Exile, in the words of Parthasarthy, that there is something to be said for exile. So this is the metaphor of exile. And you learn roots are deep. So why he has said it? What is the reason that he says there he realizes, yes, that the importance of his roots, his people, and the love, the people, they have bondings, belongingness to the place. So this is the place where he realized that no, it is not the place where he belongs to. So this kind of, say, intensity of emotions for his own culture and roots, that is what exactly depicted the poet tends to highlight here. And the feeling of humiliation also, the reason behind it, the poet, as he has mentioned, to quote himself, R. Parthasarthy, that the attitude of the people over there towards the Indians, and they call colored. Exactly, this is the word. The poet R. Parthasarthy, he himself has used this word, the colored. So here he refers to racial discrimination, and there is exodus, movement of the racial discrimination, that people against this, against racial discrimination, that there should be no such kind of discrimination among the people just because of the color, black and white. Why? So this agitation, it implies the equality among the people. So this kind of unity, equality, this the poet refers to. He rather focuses this point of racial discrimination. And the pivotal point is that there should be no such difference in the society. There should be no such distinction and discrimination just because of race, just because of color, not at all. And this kind of political movement here he refers to. So the point is that the as The visual images are also very important in this poem. So, I mean, there is some negative connotation in the notion of exile. And at surface level, it implies that the poet, as if he was compelled to leave his country and he had to live over there in England and in this foreign land. But at the deeper level, we come to know that the significance of his own culture and tradition. This is what he realized over there. So the metaphor in that sense, as you know, earlier also we discussed the point metaphorical significance of that rough passage also. So the passage, the path of life, sometimes it is very hoarse and it becomes very rough, and but it is really smoothened through this realization, through the significance of your roots and traditions and culture. This is what this kind of enlightenment, this kind of realization through the feeling of nostalgia, he actually wants to share with the readers. So, this is the purpose, and it is his journey from exile to homecoming in these three poems. So, this symbolical significance is also very important. Now, when we discuss some negative connotation, students, you just have a look here. The significant points, some significant points I would like to focus again. I mean, here, see here, some in this poem, we have some negative aspect of the notion of exile, which is being reflected. And when we talk about negative aspects, see what is significant here? Transparency, honesty. You know, he never tries to conceal something. Rather, very frankly, with, you know, honesty, with transparency, he discloses this. He shares with the readers that he actually has this feeling of alienation over there. And because of the hegemony of that culture or whatever, you know, as earlier also we discussed this important notion. So this kind of transparency, students, he has mentioned, and this is, I think, one of the important points here. And the picture of exile also, picture of exile in which through certain visual images we have, and especially, you know, his stay in England, he has pointed out here. Now, what are the images? As our Parthasarthy, he has become popular for his craftsmanship and also for, say, the images, visual images, and different kind of, I mean, and this is what his conception of poetry also. You know, we have integration between language and culture, and at the same time, language can be expressed through images. Now, here, when we discuss visual images, of course, we have this era of digitalization and advanced technology. But here, the poet refers to visual images in your creative mind. Now, in a way, we never depend on this technology only. We are not slaves of that technology. Of course, it is very important, and we must utilize it in positive way, in constructive way, in productive way. But at the same time, we have tremendous treasure of potential, and through that mindset, human psyche, we have visual impact. And this is what exactly he tends to mention. So here the importance of visual images. Images, they are already there in our mind. Okay, so here the poet, he has focused the significance of these images with visual impact. And the visual, for instance, holes in a wall. Now in the next turn, I would like to delve deep in these images, the visual impact of these images, and with several examples he has given throughout the poem. We have tremendous examples of these images that I would like to highlight. Thank you. We will continue.